Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I get together and go over the week's events in the world of Scientology. Welcome back, Tony. How was your Thanksgiving?
Oh, great. Had a wonderful weekend. I hope yours went well too.
Oh, it went wonderfully. I got to cook the whole thing from beginning to end with the family and everything. It was awesome. Okay, let's get into this. First off, on the reporting from last week, we have Grant Cardone back in the headlights and some legal stuff. What's going on here?
Yeah. This is a lawsuit that's been going on for a while, and I hadn't really paid too much attention to it, but a reader reached out to me with some interesting evidence in the case. And so I thought I better look into what's going on. Grant Cardone filed a lawsuit in January against a man named John Legere, who's the former CEO of T-Mobile USA. And the lawsuit alleges that these were two high-flying, massive social media presence tech guys who were apparently friendly and would do public forums together on Twitter and what do they call it, Clubhouse and stuff, and that they had, people wanted to hear what they had to say about, tech and finances and stuff like that, and they were friendly. But that at some point a couple of years ago, Legere started to criticize Grant publicly, and leading to this really wild argument that they had online in a public forum last June 2023, that they refer to as the exchange in the lawsuit. And Grant says basically that Legere defamed him, that the stuff he said was slander, and very seriously hurt his reputation. And what Legere said was, he called him a fraud, he called him a con man, he referred to Scientology. The main bulk of the exchange was Legere challenging Grant Cardone about whether or not he was really a billionaire or not. He makes this claim. And if you look at descriptions of Cardone, financial websites usually refer to the fact that Grant Cardone operates a $4 billion real estate investment fund. Well, that doesn't mean that he's personally worth that much, but that he, invests that money for people. How much is Grant himself worth? And Legere was saying that he falsely gives the idea that he's a billionaire, that Grant Cardone is not a billionaire. And it went on and on. Come on, Grant, admit it. You're not. Just back and forth, really kind of mean. And then they, various other accusations. And again, more references to Scientology, like it's, oh, your church going to come after me now, that kind of thing. So that was June 2023, and so in January of this year, Grant filed that lawsuit and said that this was defamation. And Legere then answered with a motion in, I think, the next month in February, saying, "Look, this was spirited debate. This was my opinion. This is not defamation." And the number one thing he pointed out, and I thought he had a point, was he said, your lawsuit doesn't actually offer any evidence that you are a billionaire. So how could I defame you by saying you're not a billionaire if you don't have proof that you are one? And he had a point about that, because if it's true that Grant is not a billionaire, then Legere did not defame him by saying that's the case. So, but then Grant Cardone came back, and his attorneys came back, and they kind of avoided that question and focused on, calling him a fraud, calling him a con man, making references to Scientology, his religion, and saying that there was malicious intent. Well, surprise, surprise! In May, the judge denied Legere's motion to dismiss, and is allowing this case to go forward. And Legere is facing a deposition in January, just a few weeks from now, in Manhattan. So with all that going on, and again, I wasn't paying much attention to it, a reader reached out to me and said, "Look, I've got something that I think might be relevant, and that is, this was a person that has signed up for Cardone's, it's a subscriber. Cardone sends out emails and things to his, followers and that kind of thing. And in September 2023, which would have been 2 or 3 months after this exchange online, and then in April of this year, which would have been a couple of months after the lawsuit was filed, Grant Cardone sent out a couple of emails, and the reader forwarded them to me complete with headers and everything, just so I could see that they were authentic. And that these emails had Grant talking about why he likes to hang out with Bob Duggan, the richest, rich Scientologist who's worth billions. And Grant talks about the reason why he likes to hang out with Bob Duggan is because he hopes to be a billionaire himself someday. And that's a little bit of a smoking gun, Chris. That Grant Cardone, right there in his emails to his followers, is admitting that he hopes someday to be a billionaire. So that suggests that John Legere was onto something. So I just thought it was worth making that public. Texas lawyer, one of our readers who is an attorney, said that he told us that yes, this is relevant information and could be relevant to the lawsuit. So I just thought it was fun to get into that lawsuit and finally figure out what's going on. I don't know, Chris. I really don't know if calling him a fraud and a con man in a public setting like that is defamation or not. I guess that's going to have to hashed out in the courts. I can say that I don't think that what John Legere did was particularly smart. I mean, if you've got a problem with Grant Cardone like that, I don't know that that's the venue to vent it. But it's interesting. The news organizations that have been following this, again, this is not coming from me. For me, I just think this is a very interesting look at the way this Scientologist is being portrayed and some of these arguments over the legal arguments. But in the press, they bring up the fact that Cardone, of course, is a big Trump supporter, and he was, featured at the Madison Square Garden rally. And numerous times, major media have pointed to this lawsuit saying that in that world of Trump supporters in MAGA land, this is a big deal because they, of course, a big part of that whole Trump following is the sense of grievance, the sense that they've been, defamed, and that they want Grant to, fight this as a way of getting back at people who criticize Trump supporters. And actually, the Guardian said that in August, Legere offered to apologize to Grant publicly in order to settle the lawsuit, and Grant said no and is continuing on with the lawsuit. So there is a little bit of that as well. Again, I'm less interested in that whole political side to it, but I'll be keeping an eye on it. We'll see what comes up after Legere has to do his deposition, which I'm sure is not going to be fun for him.
No, I don't think so. The depositions are never what you would call fun, and I'm going to throw this out here on this one, because when we look at this as Grant Cardone, the Scientologist, and the fact that he is an OT8 Scientologist, he is as high up as they can go. He is also as deep into, accepting Scientology, we could say, as you can be. And he's tight with, the likes of David Miscavige, the head. He's high profile enough that if somebody's attacking him, and the basis of the attack is partly because of his Scientologist status,
right?
Maybe he and the church are thinking, okay, we've had enough of this. It's time for us to be the same as Christians and Jews and Muslims. You don't get to bring this up anymore. Right. And maybe that's part of the push on this and why he wouldn't take the apology. Is enough, right? We're going to draw a line in the sand, and we're not going to make being a Scientologist be an acceptable accusation anymore. I'm afraid they could win that on free speech principles, even though they shouldn't. Because being a Scientologist is not the same as being a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew. So that's what I see in this, that I'm thinking would be an advantage for the church, especially in today's legal climate. So I thought that I would offer that as
well, that's interesting. And Bruce Hines, we were talking about it, he said something similar, that he felt that David Miscavige would see this as an opportunity for Scientology to fight for its reputation through Grant, and he would be encouraging Cardone to prosecute this to the end. So maybe, definitely could be something to that that's encouraging Cardone to keep this going, as there's a group of political folks that want to see him do well in this, and then maybe there's Scientology folks want to see him do well, and Legere may end up paying a lot of money.
Yeah, looks like he chose the wrong night to quit alcohol, huh? Or whatever it was. Yeah. All right. Now, another story and another interesting one. Like we're kind of out of what? Ireland, the Irish investigating Scientology. What's going on here?
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, I guess we first heard about this. It was an Irish Times investigation, really interesting. And then this week they followed it up with a podcast, and so I listened to these reporters talking about, how they developed this story. Really interesting. And the whole situation of Scientology in Ireland is so odd because the Irish people just don't want anything to do with Scientology. The 2015 or 16 census had 87 Scientologists in the whole country, and the 2022 census it was up to 120 or something. So they had gained a few people, but this is a country of 5 million people. There's like 120 Scientologists. It's just this country is not interested. But Dave Miscavige just keeps investing millions and millions. They open an ideal org, they open a community center, they open a national affairs office. They've built but not opened an Arcanon. Very strange that he's spending so much money. So, what's going on there? And then the news story was that there are people in Dublin who are asylum seekers. They've come from war-torn countries. They're looking for a way to get a new life going, just like there are in the United States and other places. And when they're applying for a political asylum, they're basically homeless. They're living in a kind of communal setting, very vulnerable people, right? These are people that cannot go home by definition. They're applying saying, listen, if I go back to this country, I'll be killed. I really need political asylum here. While they're waiting, of course, they're desperate. And so what these reporters found out was that Scientology was recruiting them, to these asylum seekers, to go down to the city center and hand out flyers for like Drug Free World or the Way to Happiness, with the promise that if they did that, they'd get this certificate from Drug Free. They wouldn't say Scientology up front, of course, but they would, certificate from Drug Free World, and it would help them with their asylum claim. Well, these reporters consulted experts and said, nope, that's not true. That you could do all kinds of wonderful things while you're in Ireland, but that's not what asylum is based on. It really looks at where you came from, what your situation is back at home, that kind of thing. So this is just a flat out lie by Scientology to recruit these very vulnerable people that will do anything to try to stay in Ireland. And so they're out there for hours and hours handing out leaflets and stuff. It's so pathetic. And the reporters did a very good job. They investigated Scientology. They described it pretty well. They just had a few questions, and I was trying to fill in some of those questions. I mean, why would Scientology be doing this? And I was trying to, in my piece, as you know very well, that whatever David Miscavige's reasons are for all that buildup in Ireland, and I have my own theory about that. Once there's a Scientology facility there, it has to show stats. I mean, that's just the nature of Scientology. No matter what, no matter no matter how much the people of Ireland don't want Scientology, the poor Scientologists that are there have to show stats. They have to show expansion. And they're desperate. They're trying to get any warm bodies in the place. And so that's why they're recruiting these people. The Irish Times reporters weren't really sure. They didn't seem really sure whether Scientology was actually trying to recruit them into the church itself and not just using them to hand out leaflets. But then they described that they were talking to some of them, and they said they had to do these staring exercises. And it's like, oh, okay. So the reporters really weren't familiar with that. But of course, that's an indication that they're having them do TR0. And of course, they are starting them on the bridge. They do want to get these people to church. Why? Again, they need some numbers. They need to show that they're actually gaining some people, of a few handful, whatever. So really sad, really pathetic, but great that the Irish Times has caught Scientology exploiting some of the most vulnerable people you can imagine.
Tell me about it. And exploitation is really the right word. This is as you very accurately said, they can't get any Irish on board. So, okay, well, here's some immigrants, here's some refugees. Let's get them. It's a natural outgrowth of their desperation for statistics, as you say. I'm not sure, what your ideas are on why they are so obsessed with Ireland, but I can offer this. Ireland is the place, Dublin specifically, where L. Ron Hubbard in 1956, I think it was, came up with the whole intro line to make new Scientologists. So Historically speaking, Ireland has significance in Scientology, and not a small one. Hubbard spent like some months there or something, and tried to work out these intro lines and how to get people on board. And this was back in the days when Hubbard was trying to figure this stuff out. Personality tests, all that kind of stuff. All of this was developed during this time. So in Miscavige's mind, and maybe only in his mind alone, I will throw out there that Ireland has to make it because that's where Hubbard's, literally invented how Scientology makes it in a way, right? It's an idea, one of many. I mean, there's also, of course, the fact that Ireland has been presented as a tax haven in various ways in the past, and there's other economic reasons. So it could be a multi-layered thing. But the historical importance of Ireland shouldn't be ignored in the analysis of that, right? Hubbard wrote issues and stuff from there. I think he lived there for a little while. So that's also part of the picture, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point. Chris Owen makes a similar point, but I'm sticking with Tom Cruise. I really think, it was supposedly a comment by Tom Cruise, who went to the Tampa org with a friend, took a friend to the Tampa org back in like 2002, and was embarrassed at the shabby condition. That's what motivated David Miscavige to do the Ideal Org program. And 21 years later, we've got like 60 plus Ideal Orgs that have cost 10 to 20 million dollars each all around the world, because that's how much David Miscavige cares about the opinion of Tom Cruise. And also, let's remember that somebody that was skeptical about the bromance between Tom Cruise and David Miscavige was Shelley Miscavige, and she hasn't been seen in 19 years. So I do think the fact that in 2013, Tom Cruise went to Ireland, was given this honorary citizenship. He was there for the premiere of Oblivion, and the Irish made a big deal about him. And it turns out the Mapother family does come from Ireland, and Tom expressed all this great love for Ireland. That right after that, David Miscavige started spending money like crazy in Ireland. The Ideal Org was 2016. The National Affairs Office was 2016 or 2017. The Narconon now. I really think, I know some people can't imagine that David Miscavige would put that much effort into someplace just because Tom Cruise said something, but I do. I really do think that's the nature of it. And I think he's trying to impress Tom, no matter, even though the people of Ireland don't want it, don't care. David Miscavige will not give up because Tom likes the place.
And the fact is that all of these things could be true at the same time.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think you're absolutely right that we should not downplay the importance of Cruise's statements and opinions on Miscavige. He lost Cruise once. He's absolutely not going to do it again. So,
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. All right. Now, this was an interesting, it was slightly, Lisa Marie, stalkers. What was this story about?
Yeah, so, sadly, Lisa Marie Presley died in January 2023. So one of the things that happens when somebody like that passes away is that eventually, at some point, the FBI will then make any files available referring to them. And the FBI put a file on its website it is referring to as part 1. So apparently there's more coming at some other time. I don't know how much, but this portion of her file covered the years 1994 to 2001. Well, I was very interested in that because I have experience getting FBI files. And of course, I'm always concerned about people being the target of FBI investigations. And so I couldn't help thinking, why would the FBI be investigating Lisa Marie Presley? But that's not the case. What it was is that over those years, she had these awful stalkers and creeps that were writing letters and threatening her. And so Graceland Security would regularly refer it to the FBI, and the FBI would come down and investigate it. Why the FBI? Because it crossed state lines. So there was a woman in Albuquerque who wrote a threatening letter to Tennessee. There was a guy in Dallas who was making threatening phone calls to Graceland. So once it crosses state lines like that, it's the FBI's jurisdiction. And so they would look into it. They would go meet these people. They would talk to them. And so the file contains those interviews, the initial notices from Graceland about what was going down. So there was a guy, for example, I think it was in Dallas, who was sending love notes and presents to Graceland for Lisa, and then wasn't hearing anything, so he was getting angry. And then he finally said something about how he was going to kill her, and so they went to go visit him, and he had a criminal record. I mean, they were worried about this guy, but he assured them that no, he would never do anything like that. So anyway, that's what the file was, and I was curious because between 1994 and 2001. Lisa was heavily into Scientology during that period, but there was really nothing. I didn't really see anything about Scientology in this particular file, but maybe we'll see something in part two, or if there's a part three, I don't know. But interesting to see, what it's like to live a life like that, where I think a lot of it, Chris, is that people that maybe don't have the strongest grip on reality think that they have a personal relationship with that celebrity, and that the celebrity owes a response or something, and it just creates all kinds of misunderstandings. So none of them were, I mean, it was the I guess the strangest one was the guy that was dropping a dime on a woman that he claimed said she had hired an assassin to kill Lisa. And what made it more interesting, more crazy, was that this woman herself claimed to be the real Lisa Marie Presley, and that the person we thought is Lisa Marie was a faker. And so they went to her, and she admitted that she did think that, but no, she didn't tell anybody that she hired an assassin. So just really bizarre stuff, and kind of interesting. And it makes you feel for Lisa that she'd have to put up with these crazies.
Absolutely. Not to mention the fact that our tax dollars have to go into paying for,
Yeah.
these federal agents to go knocking on people's doors, and they're just crazy people. And it is sad. I mean, there's a lot of layers as to how people end up that way. Nobody's born, thinking they're Lisa Marie when they're not. So it's a little sad, really, that sort of aspect of our society. But it's also interesting to get the behind the scenes on how they're followed up on, and how some of this is taken seriously. And you read about or hear about, stalkers or horrible people, but you don't see what's happening on the backside. So that's always an interesting aspect of this, which I found so interesting in the story, where all the details. Okay, now this is the holiday season, and Scientology always likes to fly. We're really not a religion; we're a business in disguise flag during this time. What did we get this week on that front?
Oh well, they. I wrote earlier a couple of weeks ago about R6 in general, and just how ironic it is that Scientology has this bedrock idea about 76 trillion years, and Jesus is a figment of the imagination and all that, but that they go heavy on Christmas. I mean, it is the Church of Scientology. They set up a winter wonderland, and they hit up people for donations. So just some fun things that they send out. It's almost like they want to, like, hey, it's Christmas. It's a magic time of year. What a great time for you to give us even more money. It's just,
Right. Exactly. These catalogs are so over the top and so ridiculous.
oh,
And I couldn't help but thinking last week when we were talking about Priscilla wearing her Scientology pendant, her cross. Well, I guess they work. I guess these catalogs work on somebody, because they're buying the jewelry,
yeah.
The only thing in Scientology, by the way, that anybody really cares about jewelry wise is the clear bracelet and the OT bracelet. The rest of it is just kind of fluff, by the way, just so y'all know. It's
Okay.
If you see Scientologists wearing Scientology jewelry, it's an outlier, even in that world. It's not a thing. But every year they're going to squeeze every penny out of these people with those damn catalogs. All right. And finally, for some holiday silliness, we had a Hubbard story quotation from one of his lectures, race cars. What are we dealing with here?
I like to print this one at Thanksgiving. I don't know why. It doesn't really have anything to do with Thanksgiving, but I love to print this one each year, or not every year, but it's one of my favorite Hubbard tales. And he talks about I think it was early 60s is when he was starting to really let his hair down about some of the crazy stories he would tell people. And he described how 40,000 years ago, this planet was part of the Markabian Confederacy, and that the Markabian doctors were so good that when some body part wore out, they would just replace it. And so it was really hard to die. Your heart's going bad, they'll put a new one in you, you know. And Hubbard's describing the society where it became like, you know, people became daredevils because there was just, you know, it was just so hard to die. And so he was said, like, when you get tired of life, you would go out to the racetrack because the racetrack was booby trapped with atomic bombs. And he would drive on the racetrack, you know, kind of a suicidal act, but would set the track record. And he would call himself the Red Streak or whatever, and he'd go out and he'd set the record, and then he would blow up. He would get blown up by atomic bombs, and but that was what he was doing, what he was there for anyway. Then he would come back 20 years later, 30 years later in a new body, and he had forgotten completely about ever being there before, of course, because they didn't have Scientology back then. And this time he's the Silver Streak, and this time he gets in a race car and he breaks the record. And the point he's making is that at some point he realized Red Streak, Gold Phantom, Silver, whatever these were, he was breaking his own records and he didn't realize it. I mean, it's like a story you'd read in Amazing Stories, right? I'm Astounding, whatever. It's like, you know, okay, cute little science fiction story that your reincarnation, and you forget who you are, you end up breaking your own records and not realizing it. But it's just kind of like so bizarre, the idea of almost immortality and wanting to die, and that was just 20 to 40,000 years ago, right here on planet Earth.
Right.
So I don't know. I find that one of my favorite of his tall tales, and I like to print it on Thanksgiving for no good reason except that I find it fun.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. I will tell you that when I was in Scientology, I and others gravitated to that lecture and lectures like it. There was a set of 6 of them put together specially called the Whole Track Lectures. A whole track in Scientology referring to all that past space opera stuff. That's what they call it, the whole track. And so we were absolutely fascinated by and hungry for any information he could give us about those times. And I have to laugh looking back now because the first human heart transplant I just checked was 1967, which is just a few years after he's giving this lecture in St. Hill. And I think Hubbard's thing, he was a Reader's Digest level consumer. That's where he got his stuff from. He would read that level of stuff. So I think, you know, that this lecture could have been inspired by something as simple as an article about the possibilities of human development or transplants or whatever, like you mentioned. And then the race car thing, which is nothing but a clever story of, oh, yes, here's a fantasy story and I'm going to make it reality. And that was Hubbard's way. And he spent an entire lecture, like it's an hour, 90 minutes, breaking this stuff down for people. And we hung on every word as though it were all true. So I, of course, for me, I look back on this and just kind of, oh my God, what was I thinking? Because it's all so ludicrous, you know, and silly. And it's funny how, you know, L. Ron Hubbard, and I say all that about the Reader's Digest stuff because he wasn't prescient. Not all the way up until his death. Hubbard never once mentioned anything like the internet.
Right.
Or even he says in these racetrack things that they're mined with atomic weapons. Well, why not nuclear weapons, Ron? You know, why not laser beam? Why not drones? Where are the drones, Ron? You know, he's never predicting anything. It's always just using what's around. So he sounded like he was so good, but he was really just such a fake with that stuff. Anyway, gotta say all that. So, Tony, thank you for your breakdowns on the stories this week. Do we have any kind of preview of anything coming up for December here?
Well, you know what the first week of December is. It's a big anniversary. This year is 29 years. It's Thursday. It will be 29 years since the death of Lisa McPherson. So we will be reflecting on that this week, as we always do, and this terrible moment in Scientology history, which still has resonance today.
Big time. Big time. Probably one of the most important historical events in the history of Scientology is the Lisa McPherson debacle, tragedy, catastrophe. Yeah. There was just nothing good that came out of that. So I hope you guys will check that out to know about that history, because it's deep and there's a lot to know about what happened to her and what happened directly as a result. Because one of the biggest fights Scientology ever had on its hands was as a result of that. So right. there's a lot to know about all of that. So definitely check it out, folks. You can see right there on the screen in front of you Tony's Substack address. Go to it, get your subscriptions or subscribe, right? Get your notifications, and then check back in with us on Mondays and we'll give you the breakdown summary. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.